Morning all. Something a bit different for today. Instead of reviewing full games from the Olympiad, I'm going to look at a specific endgame I found quite interesting from round 5 in the match between Australia and England. England won the tie narrowly 2.5 to 1.5, but on board 2, Bobby Cheng defeated David Howell in a complex Rook Endgame. Now, having already shown Bobby lose in round 1, it makes me feel better to cover a game which he wins. I also have a special personal interest in this matchup, as David Howell is the only player at the Olympiad I've previously met in slow over-the-board play. I'm privileged, but it didn't end well. Okay, on to the game itself. We're moving straight to move 53, where David played King d5, apparently the losing move. Let's have a closer look at the game line before returning this position and looking at whether Rook d4 check is a draw. Now I'm going to use a lot of engine analysis in this video, since the position is a bit above my pay grade. However, by looking at the engine lines, certainly deepens one's understanding of a Rook endgame such as this, and should be useful. Now, as I said, in the game, David played King d5. The refutation which Bobby played is e4 check. Now there's a few lines that are played here. King c6 was played, but let's have a look at what happens if black had played Rook takes e4. That variation. The problem with this is that the king has to hold on to the rook, so white can check the king away. And now king takes rook, and king takes pawn. This is a winning king and pawn endgame. There's several lines. They all rely on the white king pushing the black king back and often picking up the b pawn and then having a winning 2 pawn to none pawn endgame. So let's have a look at how that happens. King c6 seems to be the most principled move here. White moves around to the side, pushing the king back. There's 2 lines here. Let's look at king b5 first, advancing the king, counterattacking the a pawn potentially. White moves closer. Now 3 lines here. Let's look at, say, king a4 first. White moves king across. Now actually, it doesn't make sense for the black king to take the a3 pawn, because white will advance his pawn first and at his leisure take the black b pawn and easily win. So the computer line is to push the pawn to b5, and now white just squeezes black. I mean, it's quite funny. The computer doesn't even take the a pawn. But anyway, that's a winning king and pawn endgame there. Now if we go back to this position, a few other variations. Let's say the king retreated to a4. Let's say the king retreated to a6 to keep a hold on the pawn. Then white marches in once again. Black basically has to push his pawn, and now white will win the black b pawn, and once again a winning king and pawn endgame. So that's all fairly straightforward at that level. So I think the lesson there is that if we go right back to this position, Rook takes e4 is a losing move. So what we should do is king c, there is possible lines here, but king c6 seems the most principled line here, threatening to break into the queen side, holding onto the b pawn as required, and staying close to the e pawn at the same time. There's only one winning move here apparently, which Bobby played, which is a4. Now this now covers all these 4 squares in front of the black king, so it's going to be easy to check the king back, and more importantly, the black king cannot break into the white queen side position. So continuing this line, Rook h2 is what was played. There's some other possibilities here. Let's consider first Rook to f4, keeping tabs on the white e pawn so that the white king finds it more difficult to move around. Suggested line here is white can check the black king back and then pick up the e-pawn. Now if the king had moved to d7, then of course you'd be able to pick up the b-pawn. So once you picked up that pawn, not a lot black can do. In a lot of these lines, black swings over, picks up the a-pawn, and now you have rook and 2 versus rook and 1, and the advanced or soon to be advanced e-pawn makes it very difficult for black to defend this position. Also the white king's in good position, black king gets checked to the back rank, and many of these lines end up in this position, 2 pawns against 1, which is easily winning for white. In fact, I believe even I could win this line. So let's go back to other possible moves of this position. We just considered rook f4. The other lines are quite similar. So now we can quickly look at rook h3 check, which was not played. That drives the king up the board. And then now we're threatening rook g6 check, pushing the black king back and picking up the e-pawn, or even pawn check, and you can see that e-pawn's going to fall, we'll lose the a-pawn, and you can see this is very similar to the previous position with 2 pawns against none in a winning endgame. So that leaves mainly the line played in the game to consider, which is rook h1, which after the check, all played in the game, pushes the black king back, white king can advance. And black has made a choice to attack e-pawn. He could have attacked the a-pawn. Now the move which Bobby played is winning, but it's not the preferred computer line. Computer seems to prefer king d5 or even rook g4, but let's just go with the played move of king b5. So the e-pawn drops, and now we check the black king. So there's 2 possibilities here, b7 or d7. Now b7 was played in the game. We can quickly look at what happens if king goes to d7. Pawn gets picked up, and the white pawns are going to be too strong. So now we've got an easily winning rook and pawn endgame. Now the interesting thing is that David played in this position king b7, and then after taking the b6 pawn with check, I checked this on the endgame table base because now we have a small enough number of pieces, and this is winning for white. So let's proceed to see how that is done. There's a few choices for where the king can go. Let's just stick with the line played in the game. White swings back, threaten the e-pawn. Now black has surrendered it straight away. Bit of time management there by Bobby. You look at this position, clearly winning, and we'll go to the end. However, if black had not surrendered the e-pawn, then most likely he may well have been back rank mated because of his king was getting squeezed back. So this is the game continuation. White has to use his pawns and his rook to shield himself from the checks while he gradually advances the pawns. The rook is protecting the 4th rank, and the 2 pawns are covering all the squares in front of the king, so the king will get checked back, and this process just repeats. Check, and now push the a pawn so the king has a square to move up to. Cover the rank the king is on, advance the pawns. Well, actually didn't advance the pawns. It's quite strange here. Bobby went for an unusual end to this game. Check, takes with that, pushes the pawn, check. So king up and under promotion to a knight. I'm not too sure if this was quite necessary. Quite funny. And then the computer also promote to white squared bishop would actually also have worked. King advances, and knight retreats, and this is a fairly trivial win. So that was the continuation, excuse me, which David played. If we go way back to move 53, we're considering the move which is regarded as drawing. That is the line and the new variation, rook d4 check. Now the king can either go to the c file or the e file. It's basically the major two choices. Let's quickly cover the e file first, which should be quite quick to cover. Now black swings the rook back to the h file. Now if white's king goes back to d file, well, that's repetition, that's not getting you anywhere. So there's a couple of lines which white might consider. Let's pick an obvious one here, like rook g6 check, skewing across the 6th rank. White advances, and white takes the pawn, which kind of looks similar to other positions from before, but now black can pick up the a pawn. And this is regarded as drawing because white's king and rook position is so much better than the previous variations we've looked at. And you can see this continuation. Basically, white can't make any progress, probably lose one of the pawns to make any forward progress. So that line draws if the white king moves across to the e file. So now we'll just consider if the white king moves to the c file. So it's not much difference. Let's have a look at king c3 first. So black threatens the white e pawn. If that fell, well, actually that's probably what's going to happen. So let's have a look at how this works. There's different lines here. Let's assume that white takes the b pawn. After some movement here, black takes the a pawn. It's a very similar position. Black has an advanced king and a well-positioned rook, and white's king is very badly positioned, and this heads off to a draw. At this position, white could move back towards the a pawn to protect that. Let's say king d3, but that's just going to have a repetition that way. So if we go back to this position, for completeness, we'll consider one more line where white does not take the b pawn immediately. So he retreats and defends the e pawn, check, try something different, go around behind the e pawn. So black drops back, in this case to defend his b pawn. Rook attacks the black e pawn. You can see just a bit of maneuvering here. Forces the king over to the queen side. Black holds his e pawn. White's going to move his king up to get the pawn. Rook c3 check. Black's e pawn finally drops. White's a pawn drops. There's a little hope that the white b pawn will survive. In a position like this, both sides have a passed pawn. It's very unlikely that this is anything other than a draw. Black there defending across the 5th rank. Continue the computer line, it ends there. This is a drawn position. So I think I've just sort of covered quite a few of the different variations which can occur in this endgame, and you can see it does actually look like rook d4 check was the drawing line. Unfortunately, David played king d5, which allowed e4 check and then a4, which gave his rook and king much better positioning, and subsequently the under promotion to a knight and winning the game. Thank you for watching.